Hey, let's talk about the question mark node. In some cases within Logix, it may be unclear what a node does just from its name, and that's because a lot of the names of the nodes, particularly in the operators folder of the node menu, are derived from the C# operators which they implement or copy functionality from. In this case, question mark is sometimes known in other languages, or is formally talked about as a coalesce operator. The coalesce operator takes the first available value that has a non-null value and outputs that. Let's take a look at what that means with an example. This example is arbitrary and isn't really a good example in practical use, but it's an example that's good for tutorials to illustrate how the node works. Let's get going. So over here in Smooth POV, I have a simple button set up. This button uses button events to write the local user variable to a user variable here. What this does is it basically gets the name, in this case the user object, of the user who pushes the button. I cover this in a video called How to Get to the User Who Pushes a Button, so I'll link to that one in the video description, and we'll just assume that you've watched that one or are familiar with how it works. To the right of this user variable, I have the bit that we're actually going to be concentrating on, which is where we take the user variable's username and drive that into the text renderer. Because the text renderer isn't set up correctly right now, and this variable happens to be null, it means username here is also null. As this is null, it's being piped into the text renderer, and the text renderer is going, what do you want me to do with this? And just displaying a blank string. You can see that here by this purple ribbon terminating in the middle of where the text would be if it had a value. Now, the text renderer has a native way to handle this, but we're actually going to ignore that. I'll show it at the end, though, just in case you're wondering. But we're going to use the coalesce or question mark node to solve this problem to show how it works. Let's go. So with a Logix tip equipped, go to the node browser and go to operators, and then right near the top, second line down, question mark right there in the middle. When you spawn this in, it might be confusing because it starts off life as a just object data type, which is this kind of sort of beige or brown color. This is because, like other nodes, you need to plug in a value for it to figure out what it needs to be. So in this case, we're going to plug in username, and you'll see it all turns red. And then we're going to pull this out, and you'll see null appears here. If I now add another item to this, to do that, I'm going to put the tip of my Logix tip in, pull out a ribbon, hit secondary, and then just type triple dash. You'll see that we now get a triple dash output. And that's because what this node does is it looks for the first available non-null value and outputs it. So ordering is important when using this node. I've put the value which I want at the top and the value which I want secondarily as the second input. You can also add other items to this list by hitting the plus here or the minus here, which removes them. We only need 2 though. Does Mr. Minus not work on this? That might be a bug. I will double check and file a bug if that is the case, but it will work fine with the 3 items in here. Yeah, looks like it's not happy there. Well, we'll see what happens. Now that we have the triple dash here, we can now redrive the text value here, and you'll see it goes to dash dash dash. So the question mark node just outputs the first available value that is not null. Like I said, this is an arbitrary example, but this also works with slots and other types of values. It also even works with the user variable. So something else that you might have that comes up in Logix a lot is the fire on true, fire on change, fire on false nodes. These all have a user input, and if you speak on the Discord or someone sees you in game, they always advise that you put a user in here. When you put a user in here, that means that it's the user which this event will fire for, and it's always a good idea to specify who that is. What I see sometimes is people using a user variable in here and then having this output. This is great, but what if your user output is null? In these cases, you can again use the question mark node to plug a user into here. Oh, hold on, I need a new one from the operators menu so it recasts. You can plug the user into the top of that, and then at the bottom here you can plug host user. So what this will now do is it will now be, okay, we will fire on true for the user which is recorded in our user variable, unless it's null, in which case we'll default to using the host user. I've seen a couple of use cases of this where the question mark colon node, I'll link that in the video description because I have a video on that one, is being used, and an is null check is being used, and so I'll make that set up using these nodes as well. Actually, we want not null, there it is. So what I've seen before is user not null, and then use the user, Otherwise, use the host user. So these two setups, sorry, the wires are overlapping just a little bit here. Let me tidy it up a little bit for you. These two setups are entirely identical, but this top one uses less nodes. And once you start seeing question mark, you'll start knowing where you can use it. Like I kept forgetting that this operator existed, and now I'm using it pretty much everywhere. I'm using one of these in some cases. If you're using a not null node or an is null node, consider using the question mark node. As a final closing mark, you don't need this setup in particular for the text renderer. What you can do instead is, if we just go back to our old setup, like I said, this is just a visual example. Sometimes I do this in my tutorials where I have an example that isn't really good for modern use, but is good for tutorials. So here what you can do is you can open up a text renderer, and if you specify the null text here, so you put 3 dashes here, and then we clear the variable, which is just a right of no value, you'll see that we get 3 dashes here. That's what null text on the text renderer does. One day I might do a tutorial on the entire properties of the text renderer, because there's a lot there, but that is not today. I'll see you next time. Sorry that ran a little bit long, but it is important to understand how the nodes works, and I'm glad to provide a couple of examples. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.